because it has been a joint call we've been doing with the Canadian Institute for Ecology and Evolution a long time ago, and the French consulate in Vancouver. So I would like to thank you for their support. And as it was a joint call, and at that time we didn't have that much, money to put on, those groups were mini groups, like funded only for 2 meetings, and they've been going through the COVID in the same time, so it has been a long process. And they finally could manage to meet in France twice, but not in Canada, at least not full. And I would like to thank very much Isabelle Gounan and Eric Harvey and all the members of their group for their tenacity in the face of those difficult conditions. So thank you very much, Isabelle, for being here today. And I want to present your work.
Okay, thank you, Nico, for this word.
Just one last word. Sorry,
Oh, yeah.
one last word. So I'll be in charge. So I mean, like, you guys are gonna be able to ask questions at the end of the talk. You have to raise your hand, so we can give you the opportunity to speak. If you ask questions through the chat, then it's gonna be my duty to actually ask the question to Isabel. But I prefer that you actually raise your hand to do so. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I also wanted to add that the next Cesabinar will take place on October 18th, which is a Friday. It will be at 3 o'clock, 3 p.m. at the Paris time, and it will be Cyril Viol who will be presenting work about functional rarity. And yeah, now I can shortly introduce Isabelle. Yeah, awesome. Full screen. So welcome and thank you very much to Isabelle Gounon, who is a researcher at the Institute of Ecology and Environmental Sciences in Paris. She was one of the principal investigators of the Red Bio working group here at Cesab, along with Eric Harvey, who is from the Quebec University in Trois-Rivières. And Isa has a different research interest. So she's principally a network ecologist, and she also works on ecosystem functioning. She works on coupling network architecture with energy fluxes, nutrient cycling, and she's also interested in community and ecosystem stability. Her recent topics include meta ecosystems, integrating different spatial scales and different types of ecosystems, and also, as of late, social ecosystems, which means integrating feedback between human activities and ecosystem functioning. And so, yeah, very happy to have Isabelle here present the work. And so, Isa, I'm going to mute myself and it's going to be your turn. Happy presentation.
Thank you, Camille, and thank you, Nicolas, for the presentation. So yes, I will talk about this topic. So dynamic of resource landscape in ecological feedbacks and the emergence of meta food webs with this working group of Red Bio. And as Nicolas said, that it was a group that was constituted to apply to a call of Cesab and the Canadian Institute of Ecology and Evolution on the theme biodiversity at the era of global change. And we wanted to work on the emergence of resource pattern and the interaction with the biodiversity and community functioning. And so among the CESAB group, we are a bit an outlier because a lot of CESAB groups are on synthesizing data on biodiversity. But we were also free for this call to also propose like project to understand biodiversity. And here we worked on developing theory. So it will be the results from a model we have developed together. And we were founded for a group of 8 researchers. So here top line, the French one, so with Emmanuel Fraunhofer, Sonia Kefi, Nicolas L'Oeil, and François Massol. And on the Canadian side, so Eric Harvey, Sean Leroux, and Chelsea Little. And we also invited some PhD students and postdocs because it's very interesting for them to see how it works. A working group, but they were not. It was not in their own project. Okay, so we started. Do you see the title? Or there is a okay. So we started with the idea that the fact that in community ecology we often assume an underlying resource heterogeneity that can be due to rock weathering or landscape topology, and we focus on how this heterogeneity drives species coexistence or diversity. So here on grassland in Czech Republic, and how this constrains then consumers' foraging strategy and distribution. Here, for example, with voles and rodents that are constrained by the vegetation type. But this external input from bedrock, from deposition or nitrogen fixation can be very minor source for the production of plants, for example. And here it's maps by Cleveland and colleagues that show that this is the proportion of the net primary production that is due to new nitrogen, so this minor source, or phosphorus. And they finally estimate that 80% of the nitrogen used for NPP comes from recycling, and 98% of the phosphorus. So recycling is really an important source. And there is a feedback between by community dynamics on abiotic resource. And from meta-ecosystem and biochemistry research, we also see that animals can move resource. It can be very important for ecosystem functioning. And for example, here you see on the left that the amount of phosphorus that is brought from sea to land by anadromous fish or seabirds. And on the right, from how far it can be, nutrients can be translocated by terrestrial animals. And so this show it can be massive. And if we zoom on at the landscape scale, there is, for instance, animals that can transport nutrients from where they forage to where they rest. Here it's like, for example, the population of hippopotamus that can brought to rivers where they rest about 1 hectare of the savanna production. Another example can be the roe deer that have been estimated by this study to be able to bring from fields to forests about 20% of up to 20% of nitrogen deposition in the amount, this amount, depending on the proportion of forest and fields in the landscape. So it could be important sources. And so with that, what we were interested in is to understand fundamental mechanisms. And so instead of considering pre-existing resource heterogeneity, our question was, if we look at a landscape that is homogeneous in terms of nutrients, how organisms could generate spatial heterogeneity in abiotic resource. So first, we have seen that consumer can concentrate resource where they live, so in the foraging range, and then creating hotspots of nutrients that might feed back then on plant production. And we have plants where they deplete nutrient. You will have like creation of cold spots where they are. And when you have both like herbivores and plants, you will have like the resource level will depend on the balance between uptake and recycling level. Then you can think also about the process of herbivory that act as a pressure on plants and modulate the plant abundance and diversity. And then by this indirect way will also impact resource nutrient. And then you can also think about dispersal and plant dispersing in preferentially establishing preferentially where they have not much pressure by herbivores, and then herbivores that then will track them the good spot of plants. So both we expect that both the foraging and dispersal range of organisms will play on the emergence of heterogeneity in abiotic resource. So our question the main question was, how do the scales of dispersal and foraging of plants and herbivores will affect the spatial heterogeneity of abiotic resource? And then it comes that probably recycling level will have also, we wanted to know how it modulates this effect. And last, because it appears that herbivores, the effect of herbivores it's not so obvious. We asked in which conditions herbivores can affect the landscape of resource. So to address this question, we wanted to start by the most simple model that only integrates the key elements that we need to tackle these questions. So we choose an occupancy model where we have 3 layers. The layers of abiotic resource, R in blue, a layer of plant populations, and a layer of herbivore population. And so the cell, which inhabit a continuous landscape, a grid of 100 by 100 cells. And the scale of the cells, by definition, we say that it represents the foraging range of the plant. And then the herbivore can forage, have a foraging range that encompass more or less cells. And the resource dynamics at the local scale will depend on 4 main process. So first, the background dynamics, which tend to come back to a certain level, which should correspond to the level where you have no organisms, and which correspond to deposition, leaching, such kind of physical process. Then you have diffusion with the 8 nearest neighboring cells, and it tends to homogenize the landscape. So it's passive diffusion. Then you have the uptake. So when you have a plant present, it will tend to decrease to 0 the level of resource. And you have the recycling, which when you have like an organism, a population of plant or herbivore, it tends to increase the level of resource. And the difference is that they recycle on the whole foraging range, and so the herbivore will the quantity is split across all the cells of its foraging range. Occupancy model, this means that we we take the assumption that we don't look at the demography. So the scale, the demography of population, we consider that when one population comes, it reach carrying capacity very rapidly. And then, so we are we have colonization extinction dynamics. So it's at this temporal scale. So for colonization, for a cell a given empty cell to be colonized will depend on first basal colonization rates, which correspond to the propagules of the population that can reach the cell, so that are around within the dispersal range around the empty cell. And yes, it's time the number of colonizers you have. It will also depend on the resource availability. So here for plants, well, the colonization rate of a given cell will increase with resource. So for the plant, and then for the plant population only, we also consider, it's how we consider herbivory pressure. So the colonization rate will decrease with the presence of the herbivores population within the foraging range. So all the populations that can reach the cell will decrease the colonization rate by potential plant colonizers. And for the herbivores, it's the same, except that here the food for the resource for them, it's a number of plants. And that we implement competition among herbivores by dividing. So if you have a plant, it's divided by the number of herbivores that can reach the plants, that graze on the plants. And then you have, so after colonization rate, you have extinction rates, and this for a given population, you have a basal rates which correspond to random event perturbation. And it also depends on resource availability. So if the resource is very low or become very low in where you are in the grid, then you have it's more probable that the population go extinct. Okay, and so to answer our question, we had a design of simulation. We run a numerical experiment where we varied plant and herbivore dispersal range and herbivore foraging range with the distance from the focal cell varying from 1 to 2 and 5, and it corresponds to two ranges including 9, 25, and 121 cells. We also vary the basal rates to have like a variety of slow or fast colonization rate scenarios. Then to answer our second question, we varied the recycling levels. So either you have no recycling or low or high recycling. And we run simulation with or without herbivore to control for the effect of the herbivore. We run 20 replicate by treatment, so by parameter set, 25. And we start all simulation as this, so with the resource level being at R0, so the resource you have when you have no organisms, plant everywhere. And in the scenario where you have herbivore, we have 20% of the cells that are randomly attributed herbivore population. And we run that for 300 time steps, which correspond to like we reach equilibrium of the occupancy or mean resource level. And it gives, for example, something like this. So I will always use these three colors. And so we were interested in mean resource level for air, For plant and herbivores, the mean occupancies, so the number of cells that are occupied by a population. And to answer our question on the spatial heterogeneity, we looked at the spatial autocorrelation. So we use the Z-core of the Moran index. So it's the spatial autocorrelation that we looked at much more spatial descriptors, but well, this one is, well, they were all more or less correlated, and we use this one. So it tells us, compared to a null expectation for a given occupancy or a given level of mean level of resource, is it more or less clustered than the null expectation? And so then after I will use the term clustering. So it's spatial clustering is the Z-core of Moran index I will use. So I just want to show you here the range of clustering we could have if we binarize the resource landscape. So with the minimum, the mean score, or the maximum, for example. So the first results, which is our question 1. Here are the results. So you see on the x-axis, it's the ranges. So for plant dispersal, herbivore dispersal, and herbivore foraging ranges. And you see here the results of the median and the quartiles for resource clustering. And what we see is that, well, basically, if we pull all together the simulation, the major effect is from plant dispersal. So when we increase the size of plant dispersal range, what you have is it's really expected. So you decrease the resource clustering. So when you have local dispersal, so plant dispersal range of 1, the plant constitutes cluster, and it can, well, this feedbacks through the depletion of the resource on resource. And you saw also that, well, herbivore foraging range and dispersal range have little effect overall compared to the plant dispersal range. I can show you a bit here what it looks like. You see that there is also an effect on the occupancy. If you look, so the landscape we show partly. So on the right, on the left, it's a part of the resource, and then you see how it looks like for the herbivore and the plant layer. And you see that if you have less, a smaller dispersal range for plants, you have less herbivores also, and less plants population, because they cannot really choose well, they cannot colonize all everywhere, and so they are susceptible to be more well, to have the herbivore pressure can be more apparent. And so, well, this is something, well, it was expected. What was less expected is that here, when you compare with or without herbivores, there is also we have seen on the previous slide that there is almost no effect. So what is the effect of herbivores? So we see that there is a dominant effect of the plant dispersal range, and so we expect that we will see something within a dispersal range of plant, a given dispersal range of plant, and in which case we can expect to have to see something about herbivores, well, the effect of the herbivores, would be something that drives herbivore occupancy, because if you have like if it's not you have too few herbivore population, probably they have no effect. So it could be it leads to our second question about the effects of recycling, which could be a driver of that. And what we see here is like when you increase recycling, so on the x-axis, you increase plant occupancy, which also is not very surprising. You add some resource, or you enrich your system, basically. And the effect on resource clustering is that it's decreasing resource clustering, because with recycling, you fill the cold spots that are created by plant depletion. So here you can see an example of low and high recycling, and you see that in high recycling on the bottom, you have mean resource level that is lower, but the variation of resource level is lower too. And then when you look at the effect on the herbivore, well, there is a bottom-up effect on herbivore occupancy. So when you have recycling, you have more plants, and so you have more probability that herbivore can colonize and persist. And here, for example, is example of landscapes. And you can imagine that at low recycling level, with could lead to 5% occupancy. Well, these few herbivore population will maybe don't have a strong effect just because there are too few. So when can herbivores affect resource patchiness? Well, so probably within a given dispersal range of plants. So here for the further results, I just looked at the intermediate range of plant dispersal. And probably the effect of the herbivore should be stronger when you increase recycling, because you will increase the occupancy. And I just want to recap what are the different effects in our models by which herbivores can affect resource. So you have like a direct effect of recycling, but this is diluted compared to plant recycling, which also only puts all the recycling on one cell. Here with herbivores, it's split over the number of cells of the foraging range. And you have like indirect top-down effect, where when you have an herbivore around, the cell is less susceptible to be colonized by plants, and the more you have like herbivores, the less easy will be to colonize this cell by a plant. And we assume that, well, herbivory more act on small plants, so on young plants, and does not affect then the extinction of plants. And so for how it can herbivore affect resource patchiness, to me the more intuitive thing I can think of is like you have a mechanism that lead to clustering of herbivore populations, and then it will have a direct or indirect imprint of on the different layers, or on air and the resource and the plant clustering. And so what kind of mechanism can lead to herbivore clustering? Well, we have seen that with plants. The first thing is that when you increase or decrease the dispersal range of the herbivore. So we see here, so it's for different recycling levels, and the different shapes correspond to a different size of the dispersal range for the herbivores. And you see that as for plants, you have a strong decrease in clustering with dispersal range. But here what we see is that if you look at the other layers, for the same conditions, we have no impact on the plant and the resource clustering. So if you have like clusters of herbivores, in our case, we don't see any effect on the other layers. So how we can explain that? But our idea is that it will have opposed effect of dispersal range size on the fact we need to better track plants spots. So its efficiency, but also it will play on population lifespan, so the time the population can persist. And so yes, well, if you have like a small, you disperse locally, you can create clusters, but you are also less efficient to track plants, and probably you will just go extinct very quickly. And so there should be a fast turnover rates of herbivore population, and that maybe not the time to have an imprint on the other layers. So maybe in our case, what it tells us is that the spatial clustering of herbivores is not really the main driver that could have an effect on the other layers, but maybe it's more a question of time scale. So if we have mechanisms leading to a longer persistence of the population, maybe they can have a stronger effect on creating a hotspot of resource by recycling and also a cold spot of resource for plant clustering. And we still need like also mechanisms to cluster, to create aggregation, spatial aggregation. So for that, what we can think as mechanisms to lead for longer persistence, well, it could be having a larger foraging range. So here, this is what we see. What we see is that when you look at change in foraging range of the herbivore, you have, we actually see that it will have an effect on the resource clustering. And this effect is stronger when you have a higher recycling level. So when recycling allows sufficient herbivore occupancy, we have an increase of patch enough of resource when you have a larger foraging range. So here it's an example. And in parallel, what we see is that when you increase also the foraging range, you increase the population lifespan, so the time population can stay at the same place. So here I split it between slow and fast colonization extinction dynamics, because it's obviously the main driver of this lifespan. But when we split for that, you see that herbivores that have a larger foraging range, well, they have a higher probability of having plants within their foraging range, and so they can persist a longer time. What is more surprising is that it also increases the population lifespan of the plants. And even if we look at comparing with and without herbivores, so it's a gray on the dotted line, a gray point and the dotted line, you see that when you have herbivores in the landscape, you have a longer lifespan of plant population. So this could be understandable for when you have recycling, because adding herbivores add recycling resource, and it could increase the resource level, which will decrease the probability of extinction of the plants. But you have also on the left, without recycling, you still have an effect of increasing the foraging range. And so this could be explained by the fact that, well, the herbivore decrease the occupancy of the plants. And so you have less competition. I mean, in the temporal dynamics. So you have higher mean resource level. And so temporarily, when you have a replacement, you will have more probability of colonizing, less probability of having extinction. So it's an indirect effect of herbivore lowering, extending the lifespan of the plant population via decreased competition. So we expect that this longer lifespan of both plant and herbivore population could create, because they stay a longer time at the same place, they could create hair, hotter and colder spots. But still, well, we still need to have like a mechanisms to have like a spatial aggregation, because here you have like differences in resource levels that you can create that is more variance, but then clustering. So how herbivores can play on clustering? So we can come back to our first idea that if you have local dispersal of herbivores, you can build herbivore clusters, and if they are longer lived, because they have a higher foraging range, they stay longer at the same place. Maybe they, in this case of local dispersal, could indeed create like a feedback on resource and plant layers. And indeed, we see that. So here you see that for local dispersal, so here it's the case with high recycling. You see that the herbivore spatial clustering increase with herbivore foraging range. And this is also the case for plants. And for resource, at least with large foraging range, we see that clustering of resource is higher than if you don't have herbivore, so it's a shaded area. So this is the mechanisms that could work. But well, if it's the only one, what we can expect also is that if herbivores disperse globally, then we won't have like aggregation of herbivores, and then we won't have an effect on the resource. And actually, this is not what we see. So we even see a stronger impact of on resource clustering with foraging range of the herbivores, despite there is no aggregation of herbivores. So there is something else. So we see also that there is an effect. We just change the foraging range of the herbivore, and we see that there is like a clustering of plants that increase and also of resource. So as it's not something it should come from how herbivores can make plants clustering. And an idea could be an explanation, potential explanation can be this. So here what I show is that the red square is the foraging range of an herbivore, and the red dot the position. So even if you have like over dispersed or really randomly distributed herbivore population, then when you increase the size of the foraging range, if you go from left to right, you see that for certain condition, you can have like overlapping areas of foraging ranges between different herbivores that are, well, evenly distributed in the space, but their range overlap create like differences. And here you see that the darker the color, the more difficult will be the colonization by plants. So you see that there is like where the herbivores are located, it's easier for the plants to colonize, and where it's at the edge, you have first there is less probability a plant colonized, but also there is more recycling, because you have overlapping areas where different herbivores can recycle. So I think this is a possibility. And another interesting thing that we have is that if you look at the blue panel, you can see that compared to the case without herbivores, when you have small foraging areas of herbivores, you can, the effect of the herbivore is to homogenize the landscape of resource. So we can interpret that as a higher effect of the recycling compared to top-down effect on plants. And if you have a larger foraging range, you have like a creation of heterogeneity in the resource landscape. So due to probably overlapping areas, which create that. Okay, so the take-home message of the results. In our results, what we see is that, well, the dominant effect of in our model was, well, the dominant effect for the resource level was the depletion of plants. And so what was the dominant driver for the clustering of resource was what drives plant clustering, and it was plant dispersal. But at a second level, we also see that there could be emergence of heterogeneity via species interaction and recycling. And animals could play a role, but this is more it is through mechanisms that are not obvious, because you have like opposed effect on clustering. You have indirect and direct effects that have opposed effect. And for example, recycling, it could it decrease clustering, but in the same time it increase occupancy that is important for plant herbivore population to have an effect. Or dispersal, increasing the dispersal range, the size of the dispersal range of herbivore also have dual effects. Well, if you have a small dispersal range, you can cluster, but you make ephemeral clusters so that don't allow to have an effect on a resource. And so we still see that there is a possibility, but you need for a large herbivore foraging range that have a temporal effect on the dynamics. And this is this combination of temporal aspects making population persisting a longer time, and creation of heterogeneity. So this is this combination that allow to see emergence of heterogeneity due to herbivores. Okay, so well, this was our results. A bit trickier for the last part. And if I want to talk about the perspective of the Red Bio group, well, I want to show you. So here was the initial project. So we were much more ambitious, but this is a bit always like this in theory. We started and we want to start simple, and to understand things with simpler elements, and it's always more complex that we expect. And so we wanted to have food webs, but finally it's only food chain. We wanted to also have like integrate some demographic aspects and to link them to body size of species, to make a direct link between movement, the scale of movement, and the biology of organisms. And we were also thinking of looking after at perturbation scenario and also evolution. And all these things we still have in mind, but we just have started then. And well, we started with a master project to integrate the demographic dynamics and body size with Josquin Gerber. But it was the same. So it was interesting, sufficiently interesting to understand the local scale that finally we didn't have time to specialize and continue that. And we also have some of these aspects of the project that we can be part of the ANR1 that we got funded this year. And where we will look at the aspects of integrating complexity in this framework with how spatial and food web structure interact. So this is part of it. And the last thing we wanted to talk about the advantage and challenge of a modeling working group. So to share a bit our experience. So we built a team that were very diverse, and we had like not only modeler. We have Eric and Chelsea who were also empiricists, because we wanted to have like really to take advantage of these funding working groups, workshops to be able to interact between modelers and empiricists, to have like something that is really grounded in reality, even if we do theory. And it was really interesting. So we had really interesting brainstorm. Maybe the difficulty was that Nicola told about it. It was we started with COVID, so it was difficult because we could not do all the meetings we wanted, and finally we never have everybody in the same place, because but it was very, very interesting. And from a more specific thing about having a modeling project with a working group is that it's not so easy to split tasks. So because you have a phase where you brainstorm, this is really really easy and really enriching to do it together. But then there is the coding and the first stages where you want just to make a lot of different things, and you have preliminary results that are a mess. And this, you cannot do it together. You need to do some work outside the workshop session, and then come back. And what is very fruitful, what we was to then, when you have preliminary results, share it, discuss on the mechanisms, interpretation, and then start doing a second round to understand better. And the diversity of our background was really cool, because I think we push a lot the mechanisms. The understanding the mechanisms, and I think we did like strong theory. And last, the tools for sharing, well, we were not really really good at that. So mostly we use Drive to share documents, but Slack, we tried some things, but it was not so easy. But we needed to use some tools, but it depends on people, I think. And then, but this is also what said Nicola. So it was a small group because it was the start, and we didn't have funding for junior researchers, and maybe for such a modeling working group, if we want to have faster progress, there is some parts like the preliminary simulation and understanding that would have go faster if a junior researcher were in charge of it. So, well, yes, thank you. It was, if you have some question, I'm happy to discuss with you.
Thank you very much, Isa. Okay, and nice finishing note. Okay, so you need like brute task force of junior scientists to go faster. Very well. So now is going to, thank you for stopping to share your screen. We are going to authorize people to unmute themselves. And so please, if you have any questions, raise your hands so that we can keep track of the order in which people talk. If you don't want to talk orally, you're also welcome to ask questions in the chat. And so go for it.
Well, I might break the ice if you allow me. So thank you very much. I mean, that was a very inspiring talk. And I mean, as you've been showing on the last slide, where you've been initially thinking about more complex system with predators and blah, blah, blah. And I was wondering if that was not clearly the main, up into getting clustering of nutrients, is that you actually add some kind of pressure on the herbivores that make them gather together. So that might be predator, but also kin selection might be a mechanism through which they aggregate in space. So what are your thoughts about that?
Yes, we were thinking that because if you have like top-down pressure, well, we were interested into looking at these different of scales of using the space. And we were thinking that when you will have like a different range depending on the trophic level you have, you will have different, or we can do a lot of scenarios, but it will, we were thinking that the top-down pressure, even if with herbivore, but also with predators, could play a clearer role than what we've seen. And well, I think there is a lot of way this can play a role. And I'm very happy that we started very simple because, as you have seen, it was already complex to disentangle what was the different mechanisms that can play only with one layer. And so I think now we have some tools to understand better when you add predators. So
Thank you.
Thanks. Hélène, do you want to ask a question? Hi.
Yes, hi. Thank you very much, Isabelle, and thank you, the CESAB, for this very nice webinar. I have a question around restoration, because as you know, there is a lot of concern now, a political concern around restoration and the tool we can use. And do you intend to explore this link? And second question, do you think that this kind of work can be a great example to trying to explain to stakeholders that complexity is a good news for ecosystem?
Yes, I think well, it's very difficult for to interact. Well, usually what the people who are in charge of managing things, well, they want like simple response. And yeah, maybe the easiest thing for them to for us to explain well to how to say, I think it's easier for us rather than to have we can show some things with complex mechanisms that occur, but then when you want to implement that, use that for conservation, I would say that all this the main message is all this you cannot, you need to conserve different things to be sure that you will have you will keep something functional and yes, you
I think there are good examples in your research, this type of research, to explain that, because most of the time the response is no, it's too complicated. We want a simple response, as you said.
Yeah, well, so it's difficult to say like, look what we have done. It's we have some solution for you, but we can say, look, even with very simple thing, as a very simple system, you have like complex interactions that needs to which contribute to the functioning of the system, and if you have an impact on one simple layer, you can have very non-intuitive results. And so, yes, thank you.
Well, I have a question that kind of follows up on Hélène's one. Is since you touched a word about the fact that your group was quite diverse in terms of working interest, like you had people that were in theory and people that were more into empirical research. Does that mean that so what was their opinion, of these empiricists in your group about the non-intuitive results? Like, were there times where it was difficult to, I don't know, put some ecological meaning into these results that you were having a strong, like a hard time to disentangle from one another, or because I guess that's often a question in modeling, right?
I think the bigger part was to brainstorm for build the model, and so the discussion were what can we remove, what can we simplify, and is it still meaningful for the for what we see, to understand what we see. And so I think we also the person, the empiricist in our group were also they like the theory, and they also like conceptualizing. They have a good background on that also, even if they don't do models. And so understanding the mechanisms was important for them. And I think when we discuss, well, yes, it was really a discussion about what is meaningful or not. But then when we talked about the perspectives, for example, one next thing we wanted to do, for example, like exclusion, numerical experiments with exclusion, where part you have like a pressure, part you don't have. If you have like some transfer between them, do we have the same results? So we started with very simple things, but then the conservation and the more realistic things we see were just pop up. What if we have also some heterogeneity? So in the underlying heterogeneity, you have like, I don't know, different habitats, and you have like crossing animals that cross in the, well, how will can they generate or erase all heterogeneity? This kind of thing was in the discussion about what can we do and what next projects. It was really apparent that these concerns, empirical concerns, were present.
So should I go on with because this is very interesting in terms of the functioning of a working group in theory. So I gathered from what you said that you originally had like more ambitious goals. So does that mean that straight away in your first brainstorming among your group, you had this idea of like a complex model? And now you just said that your main questions were, okay, what can we remove to simplify? Was that among the very first discussions, or did that come after that you had your hands into it and were trying to see some things and realized that the results were too complex to untangle at first?
Well, we were several theoreticians, so we knew that if you want to understand anything, and when you have like feedbacks with recycling, you need to make it simple, or at least to start simple and then add layers. Otherwise, you will understand nothing, and then your model is useless. So it was really a model to understand some mechanisms. It was not to reproduce something specific, but to answer some questions. And so the discussion with more empiricist researchers were also, well, what is the to what situation that will correspond to have like a, I don't know, do we only need to say plants are depleting things? And do we need to have like the demographic dynamics? Do we, if I remember well, I don't know. I seen Sean is you if you remember. The first discussions were do we need to have first heterogeneity first, and to have something that is because having a landscape where everything is the same is really something that is not true.
Realistic,
never nowhere. But well, it shows that we were all people doing modeling will tell you that you need to start with something. If you have already some variation, you won't understand anything about your mechanisms. So yes, we were just saying that well, we will do more complex things the next step.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Are there any more questions?
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
I
Nico,
mean,
go ahead.
yeah, that's a kind of, we have some time to discuss about that later, but still, I'd like to know more generally, do you think there are some types of ecosystem that are more likely to show hotspots of nutrients, and would they be mostly terrestrial?
Well, in my mind, something that is spatially explicit like this, well, you could think about, I think as more terrestrial ones, but you can think about like shallow aquatic things. If it's shallow aquatic systems, you can still have like differences in I don't know, in seaweeds patch and herbivores. So it could apply also to like shallow coastal systems. And to which type of ecosystems? I would say, for example, in arid ecosystem, you have also some other things, but when you have like herbivory pressure in semi-arid systems, I also think that the mechanisms we have looked at, well, they will be combined in with other mechanisms of niche construction in any ecosystem type. So it's really like a basal knowledge we need to have to understand more complex things.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Isabelle.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much. I don't know if anybody has other questions they'd like to ask. Now is a good time for it. Otherwise, I guess we're going to wrap up.
There was just a comment by Melanie Roy, who said, I mean, that's a super interesting talk. Thank you. And she was thinking that colleagues from OFB working on large fauna would be super interested by what you've been doing, but I'm sure you already interact with them. And if you don't, then there are plenty of people here that might be interested, so we can make a contact for you.
Thank you.
Well, okay, then I guess we're going to end the session. Thank you very, very much, Isa, for this very interesting presentation. Thank you, everybody who logged on. Hopefully, we will see you in 1 month for the next number 3 Cesabinar, which will be with Cyril Viol on the 18th of October at 3 p.m. Paris time. And thank you also to the rest of the Cesab team who was helping to organize this.
Yes, thank you very much, you all Cesab, for funding and the organization. It was cool.
Awesome.